Welcome to this week's edition of the Belau Report. Another update. Halfway through the session, we have Senator Carla Nelson with us this week. And Carla, welcome. I know you're swamped with competing interests, but...
It is great to be with you, Jane. Always terrific to join you.
What would you like to tell our viewers this morning?
Well, we've had a lot of great things happen in this first half of session already. As you know, the Highway 14 project was fully funded last year, needed a little language clarification to get those bonds out the door so that construction can begin. That's not only good for us, it's a life-saving, much needed widening of that Highway 14. And then also, again, these things take a while to get through, but last session we passed some significant funding for mental health crisis units. And I'm so glad to say that Olmsted County was awarded some of that funding. And I think that is going to help immensely. Now, 1 in 3 Minnesotans have some mental health care needs, and we have a lot of barriers in place. I believe that this mobile crisis or this crisis mental health spot in Olmsted County will be very helpful in getting help early on.
So what's left?
Well, what's left is the big budget wrangling that is going to happen this year. As you know, it's a budget year. We're setting the budget for the next 2 years, and Governor Walz put out his budget proposal the end of February. I would say that was an aspirational budget as far as magnitude of spending. And now, of course, the budget forecast came out a couple of weeks ago, updated, and we lost $500 million. That's $500 million less anticipated revenue coming into the state than expected. So Governor Walz is going to reprice his budget. And then, of course, we're working on our budget in the Minnesota Senate. The House is working on its budget proposal. And we expect to get these things out earlier this year, something that I've called for, that fourth deadline where we have those global targets between the House, the Senate, and the governor. That will really lead to a orderly and on-time conclusion of session. So I'd say mark your calendars on May 6th. That is what all three have said they agree to. And if we get those global targets on May 6th, I believe that you will see a good, orderly, no last-minute lawmaking type of session.
Okay, tell our viewers about Rochester Day at the Capitol before we go to specific issues.
Oh, that's always a great day when you have hundreds of your constituents come to the Capitol. And you know, our folks are so involved in what's happening both here and at the state Capitol. They have meetings with legislators, and I know that our folks were there lobbying the transportation chair, the tax chair, for certain initiatives that are important to our community, bills that I happen to be carrying. And Rochesterites always receive a warm welcome at the Capitol.
Okay, all right. Biggest issue confronting you when you're looking at the budget right now?
Well, there's a couple really large issues. One has to do with our health insurance, our health care costs. You know that private market, that individual market was really decimated with the advent of the misnamed Affordable Care Act. And so last year we did some reinsurance to help make that market still available for sole proprietors, small businesses, those who are not buying in the group market. It was highly successful, even more successful than we thought. And now we will be able to use the money appropriated last cycle to further that reinsurance going forward. But that isn't the answer. It's a Band-Aid to keep those who buy insurance on the private market available. And that involves your entrepreneurs, your small businesses, your sole proprietors, your farmers. So it's a significant issue, but it's going to continue to be an issue going forward, is how do we move beyond the Affordable Care Act, which was not affordable. And one of the issues that we will be looking at right here is the provider tax. That is something that 2% tax added on to every health service by everyone who comes, who has any health service in Minnesota. And as you know, our area right here pays more in that what we call the sick tax than anyone else. And so one of my jobs will be to fight off those who want to extend that sick tax.
When you say reinsurance, who does that money go to?
The reinsurance is, as all insurance companies often have, it's a reinsurance funds to help them insure those high-risk cases, those bigger cases. So when the claim reaches a certain amount, I think it's $250,000, then the reinsurance picks up. So it keeps everyone's premiums lower by putting the high-cost cases into its own little pool. Something we used to have something like that with MNCHA, but the Affordable Care Act disallowed that.
And then this goes to the insurance companies then?
Yes, yes. It doesn't go to the insurance companies. It pays for those claims over the $250,000.
Okay. All right. The governor wants to have an Affordable Care Act for everybody in Minnesota. How will that work?
Well, I love the intention. We want to make sure everybody has access to high quality, affordable health care. But my fear is the governor's plan, which is like a Minnesota Care buy-in for all, will actually reduce health care options for Minnesotans. Unfortunately, we know that government-paid health care never pays the bills. And if all of the health care is paid for at government levels, government amounts, we are going to see our rural, particularly smaller health facilities and hospitals decimated. And also we will have just much less choice. And I worry if that were to go on long term, we would not see the innovations that we see that are revolutionizing medicine, whether it be regenerative medicine or deep brain stimulation or any of those things, or the new treatments for things like Parkinson's. And so we don't want to limit our healthcare innovations either.
Well, MnCare excludes Mayo, right?
I'm not clear on that.
Yes, outside of the metropolitan area. And that's what you're talking about for the full state.
That is what some people want. I do not believe that's a good idea for all the reasons I just mentioned. And if you could imagine people it would really be unfair to say that people who buy on the MnCare for All cannot go to their own world-leading healthcare center.
They're going to say, you can keep your doctor, right?
You can keep your doctor, but just not the one you want.
Okay. MNLARS, they gave another grant of what, $13 million to MNLARS?
Yes, we're well over $100 million. MNLARS mayhem. I'll tell you what's so sad about that.
We have to tell our viewers for sure what that is.
Yeah, MNLARS stands for the Minnesota Licensing and Registration System.
Yep.
So that's your driver's license and your tabs. And the problem there is it was rolled out over a year and a half ago. It was truly a mayhem and disaster when it was rolled out. But the saddest thing is, I want you to know that deputy registrars right here in Olmsted County identified the problems before the disastrous rollout, and the governor decided to roll it out anyway. So this was totally preventable.
But it's being rewarded now with another $13 million, right?
I wouldn't say it's being rewarded. I would say it is a necessary step to allow Minnesotans to continue getting their licenses and their registration. But it is one of those things, it's like, when do you cut your losses? We have spent $100 million over 10 years, and this program is still not working. I believe that we have to look at bringing in experts from outside government to develop this system, much as other states have. Minnesota brought all of that in-house, and I just don't believe that we had the expertise to do that.
So what are you going to do about it?
Well, I believe that we are going to strenuously encourage and look at getting the professional, I shouldn't say professional, I should say the experienced folks who have done this in other states to come in and help Minnesota sort out this mess.
It boggles one's mind that it's gone this far and cost this much.
It has, and there's a common theme here. The common theme is our IT, our Minute, that Minnesota IT has just boggled everything we've done. I mean, we saw the disastrous rollout of MinSure when that happened several years ago. The technology just didn't work. Then we saw the MinLars mess, and now we want to make sure, as we look at the Help America Vote Act funds coming from the feds, that is not a boggled mess when it comes to something as important as voting.
And tell us what the problem is.
Well, we hope there's not a problem. We want to avoid a problem, but the federal government has set aside these HAVA funds, Help America Vote Act funds, and it's a significant amount of money, $6 million. About $1.5 million was put forth in the big omnibus bill that the governor vetoed last cycle. And so we'd like to make sure that we get the 1.5 million funds from HAVA funds secured. We passed legislation to do that a couple of weeks ago, and also a down payment or the 5% match required to secure the additional 6 million, or another, I should say, 5.5 million. So we want to make sure that Minnesota receives that money. It will, because if the governor signs the bill here shortly. But then we want to make sure that those funds are used in a way that ensures that Minnesotans' ballots are protected, all votes are counted, and we have a little bit more work to work through committees to secure that last leg of funding for that.
What, any cautions or concerns at this point?
Well, no, that's why I think we're having the hearings, to make sure that we don't run into any of these horrible messes that we've seen on grand scales, and particularly when it comes to our elections.
Okay, tell our viewers about your choices for priority action in the legislature in the last half of the session.
Well, there's a number of issues. I know you've heard about tax conformity with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that the feds passed at the end of 2017. That's important for all Minnesotans. I'm a little worried about how this tax season is going to impact Minnesotans, because we did not get that conformity last year. The governor vetoed that. That is moving along. We also need to look at what I talked about with this reinsurance, to make sure that we still have an individual health insurance market. You can imagine what would happen if we did not. Everyone would go on a government subsidized health care, which would lead to all the problems that I'd mentioned before. That's an issue. We did talk about MinLars. That's a recurring issue. There's just a lot of cleanup things really to do from the last year, either things the governor vetoed or some of these IT things that are not working. Of course, another issue that I'm very focused on is really our government. It can no longer, with the demographics that we have, we can no longer think that government is going to be able to respond to every issue. We must do what John Brandel, founder of the Humphrey Center, suggested 20 years ago. We have to look at bringing in private funds as well. We have to look at leveraging public dollars with private dollars. And I think that is very important. There's a couple initiatives that I'm working on that are important to this area that do that. One of them is PTech, that's Pathways in Technology in Early College High. And it leverages an industry partner. For example, IBM has done some wonderful PTech schools in other states. It leverages an industry partner with a community college and a local public high school. Those three partners working so that every kid grade 9 through 12 and then years 1 and 2 after graduate with obviously a high school diploma, and then a career industry credential or AA degree in a technology field, and are first in line for jobs at that industry partner. And there's all the mentorship, internship, and apprenticeship in those 6 years as well. That leverages private dollars to fulfill our workforce crisis, particularly in the technology area. Another area I'm working on, again, a public-private partnership, is affordable housing. We know that there's a great dearth, just a vacuum of affordable housing in our community. And the proposal I have is the affordable housing tax credits. It leverages private dollars. You or me or anyone else could contribute to the affordable housing tax credit fund, the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. You can say where you want those affordable housing buildings to be, and that leverages additional public dollars. It stretches our public dollars further. It lets employers help fund this affordable housing shortfall, and it lets citizens like you and me and your viewers as well contribute, get a tax credit for that, and then help fund that affordable housing in their own communities.
Okay. Since we talked last, they've had this national scandal of people purchasing college for their children. Anything in Minnesota?
No, but not that we know of, and I can tell you we will be looking deeply into our higher education to make sure that that's not happening. I've served on the Higher Education Committee for a few years. There's no indication of that, but I think we have to be very diligent and make sure that that is not happening in Minnesota.
The good news is the university's in the NCAA tournament.
That is
starters.
That is good news.
Okay. The governor is really focused on education. He wants early childhood education, and are you on board with that?
I appreciate Governor Walz, also a former teacher like I am, really his focus on education, because we know that education is the great equalizer. It's really the moral issue of our day, it's the racial issue of our day, and it's the economic issue of our day. It's education that closes those disparities that we work so hard to make sure everyone has an equal shot, equal opportunities. And so I appreciate that. The magnitude is a little large on the governor's budget. While I appreciate the things he's doing, it comes at a great cost. And the commissioner refused to answer in committee when I asked how we were going to pay for all of these items. So she had two opportunities to answer that question and chose not to. But I do appreciate his focus, also on early childhood. High quality early learning is important to make sure all our kids are ready for kindergarten when we get there. And I have to say his approach is different than his predecessors. Governor Dayton really pushed for universal pre-K where every 4-year-old was in the public schools. And that would have decimated the early childhood market that already existed for 4-year-olds in the private sector. It would have cost oodles of money, and our schools are already strapped. Resources are a little thin, and it didn't target resources to those most in need. I favor a more targeted approach where resources go to parents who would not be able to afford high quality preschool for their kids. There's parent choice, and of course those preschools have to be preparing kids with a curriculum that's preparing them for kindergarten. And fortunately, Governor Walz did not continue down that line of universal 4-year-olds adding another grade to our grade schools. So I appreciate that greatly.
Okay. Trails, you have a bill for a trail?
Yes, you know, the Minnesota voters with the Legacy Amendment in 2008, I believe it was, or 2006, voted to extend our sales tax with a small percentage of that going to trails. And so every year we look at what those trails should be and what will be helpful. We've had two right here in this area. One is the Chester Woods Trail, which was funded in our last budget cycle, and that's nearing completion. And that will connect County Road 11 to the front door of Chester Woods. There's another trail that's very important in this area, and that is the Willow Creek Trail. And that is over by the Boy Scouts camp and would connect that area with all the trails within the Rochester trail system. So those, I think, are the best kind of trails. They connect to other trails that are in existence, or they complete projects that have already been started.
We don't want to miss the taxes, including the provider tax and also the gas tax. Tell us
Oh.
what you think.
Well, the gas tax proposal, again, is a order of magnitude. Governor Walz, his proposal would increase the gas tax by 20 cents a gallon. That would make Minnesota the fourth highest in the nation for gas taxes. And I just want you to think about how that would impact you, not just your driving, but all of the goods that you purchase and how they get to the store where you would purchase them. All of those would go up dramatically. And there's just also something that doesn't really make sense about the governor's proposal, because not only does he increase the gas tax by 20%, he also then takes the tax that is a sales tax on auto parts, auto usage parts, those type of things, and takes that away from roads and bridges and puts it into the general fund. So that there's just a lot of things that don't make sense on that gas tax proposal. And the other thing is, quite frankly, the gas tax is the most regressive of taxes. It hurts people who are poor the hardest because they have cars that have the least miles per gallon. And it doesn't tax those who are most wealthy and affording electric cars that certainly use roads and bridges, but they don't pay at all for those through the gas tax. So I think there's a better way.
So how do you approach that?
Well, I think we do a couple things, things that have been successful in the past. One is dedicating that increasing source of revenue, and that is sales taxes on all auto parts, auto-related purchases. That's a increasing source of revenue, while the gas tax is a decreasing source of revenue. So we need to continue that. And in the past, just like we funded Highway 14, it was through bonding, which actually is taking state dollars, that a bond authority, just like the mortgage on your house, you spread it out over the life of the asset, and that's what is happening with our bonding as well. And I think we should continue that as well.
Okay, any chance that the provider tax will not be continued?
I'm hoping, right now it will sunset in 2020. We have funds to continue paying for the health care that the provider tax paid for through 2021. And quite frankly, the feds are paying for most of those costs right now. So I do hope the sunset sticks. We don't want to see that reinstated, but there are some other ways to look at creatively looking at how to maybe through claims surcharge on your insurance policies, which is less onerous than the provider tax. You don't pay that on everything, just the claims that are paid. So we're looking at ways to actually close that gap, but the reality is the feds are paying for what the provider tax originally was put in place to pay for.
And where does it go now?
Well, right now, unfortunately, it goes into the general fund. It's called the Healthcare Access Fund. And every once in a while, the legislature votes to take money out of that Healthcare Access Fund and just put it in the general fund. So we've been rating that, unfortunately.
Okay, and Rochester cares a lot about a bonding proposal for our airport.
Oh, yes. That's one of the proposals that I'm bringing forward. It's very important for a lot of reasons. One, the lighting system that we have does not let planes land when things are, less than optimal. With the new lighting system, there will be more landings when weather isn't just perfect, and then there will be a third runway as well. That's really important. We are seeing, as you know, 6 cargo loads of samples flown into the Rochester airport every day that then go off for testing. And because sometimes they couldn't land because the visibility did not allow and we didn't have this new lighting system, some of those samples have actually lost their lifespan, and they've had to go back and get new samples. And you can imagine how difficult that is across the country, especially if it's something like a biopsy, something like that. And so it's very important that we allow maximum use of our airport.
What are we looking for from the legislature?
Yes, we're asking for, we need $7 million of state funding, and that will leverage about $40 million from the feds.
That sounds like a bargain.
It is a bargain, and I will anticipate working to make sure we get that done this year.
Good. Okay, what else?
Well, you know, last week we had an explosive report from the Office of the Legislative Auditor. It's called the Child Care Assistance Program. It's the state help fund child care for children whose parents could not afford child care, so those parents can work. There has been fraud, massive fraud uncovered there, kickbacks, and totally an ineffective department that has a lot of angst and not working together, just a dysfunctional department. So it was, like I said, one of the most explosive reports that I have seen. There's already 4 bills working through the process to try and, we have to root out that fraud. The worst thing is, you know, every taxpayer dollar should go exactly to what it's intended for. And every time there's a fraud where a taxpayer dollar is misused, that's money that's not going to the kid that needs it. And again, our government needs to do a better job of having accountability and transparency for every one of those taxpayer dollars.
Thank goodness for a legislative auditor.
Oh, our legislative auditor has done a remarkable job really exposing the problems that really have been left really from the last administration, whether it be the CCAP that we just talked about, or the MNLARS, or the MNSURE. Those are 3 massive problems that the state government did a very poor job in rolling out, and have caused significant problems for Minnesotans, and loss of money and loss of services.
And where would you lay the responsibility for that?
Well, the CCAP program, the responsibility seems to have been within the department, and some are calling for the CCAP lead to resign. There was just a real dysfunction in the department where the 14 investigators were apparently telling the CCAP lead about these issues and being ignored. There was some fear in that department too for even bringing those things forward.
3 minutes left, so your choice.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot we could talk about. What I want to say is there are so many good things that we can and must do, and it requires that we work together in a bipartisan manner to do what's best. I would like to spend just a minute talking about government accountability and transparency, particularly when it comes to settlements. As we know, Minnesota was not immune to, in this case, legislators who resigned because of sexual harassment. And what I found in looking at that is that we have a culture that encourages sweeping those type of offenses under the rug. And we do that by requiring a non-disclosure agreement if there is a settlement. I have a bill called Government Accountability and Transparency in Settlements, AKA I call it no hush money. And that is working its way through the legislature. I think that is critically important, that we don't require those non-disclosures, and then that we get a report every year on funds that your government has used for settlements, where the funds came from, what was the offense, and after due process, who was the offender there. So I think it's very critical.
All right. How can our viewers help you?
Well, there's a lot of ways that you can help me. One is by please contact me. Tell me what's important to you. You can reach me, sen.carla.nelson@senate.mn. I'll be putting out a legislative survey soon digitally. I'd very much like to have you participate in that. The issues are framing up, and I want to know what's important to you. And then also every week I send out a newsletter that does have a survey question, something that's happening in the legislature, and you can request that from my office as well. It's just a great honor to represent and serve Olmsted County. That's Rochester, Chatfield, Dover, Yoda, Stewartville, 14 townships in the Minnesota Senate. And I can only do it well if I hear from you. So thank you for your involvement and trust, and I look forward to hearing from you as the session begins the second half.
Do you have any email?
Yes, I do.
Address?
Yes, that would be sen.carla.nelson@senate.mn. You can
Great.
also call me, which is 651-2 296-5956. And I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Senator Nelson, and thank you, our viewers, for your interest in Minnesota issues. And we'll be with you next week, same time, same channel. Have a very good week and a very good night.